Welcome. What I'm going to be discussing here in this session is the design of the intersections where the stations will be on the Eglinton Transit Corridor. At this time, we have tremendous amount of work that's been done on the design of the below-ground construction. And as to what happens at the ground level with the stations and how this integrates into the main street and again into the neighborhoods and how it provides those services with the interconnecting bus routes has not been defined. Here we see a section that shows the actual drilled tunnels and the bottom box, which is the platform level, and we see the concourse jumper that then takes people up to the sidewalk above. In the isometric, we see the platform in the dark, and then we see the box, which is the concourse milling area that leads out then to the sides. And again, associated with this, we see that there's some mechanical venting requirements as well, but nothing about the stations. And if we look at what's been provided in the way of information at the ground level, here we see at a typical intersection the box, which is this platform, which is some 600 feet long, and in the yellow we see where we have the lifts that take us up to ground level, and there's the identification of the bus stops to link in with the cross-sectional route that comes down from north to south. Does not show, though, any station. Ultimately, what we have is a game theory strategy here, that we have the station below ground, which has the capability of looking to any one of these four intersections to provide a station. And it is here where we go from the public sector building the system to then integrating with the private sector who can provide the facilities that are required at each one of these 25 locations to provide a true ground station for this system that is so necessary. Here again we see in very simple form the matrix. So we have the Eglinton horizontal line of the LRT line below ground, and it connects up with all these tributary transit routes. In many instances it'll become a backbone, and these lines that might have been run to other points or stations will now take on a much more rigid grid because they will be reliant upon the backbone of the LRT. And then this brings us to the question of stations. And it's these stations that handle this transition. They are gateways that then have the transit ridership interconnect to the subordinate lines. And we want to make sure we provide an environment, whether it's in the busy time of the day where everything is a rush and things run quickly, or on the other hand, those long hours where it is a case of waiting for your connection, to ensure we do provide a robust service. All along Eglinton, we're going to find that there's intensification as it's intended along this mixed-use corridor. So the main streets will see additional development beyond what is there now. And it's our hope, again, that we get a very rich, serviced, activated retail and services environment, and above that, an overburden of residential development. And all of that should be focused on the transit. Now, between this mixed-use corridor and the surrounding neighborhoods that so closely encroach upon the main street is a point of transition where we have to see that the intensifications intended along the corridor makes a successful change to the residential neighborhoods, and that it does not become a burden or impact upon them, because we have a commitment to preserve and protect our neighborhoods. Then overall, in the bigger picture, there's the watershed itself. I call it the walk shed here, in the sense, 5-minute walking distance to a station. So we have the LRT, we have the tributary lines, we have the stations, we have the main street environment, then we have the neighborhood around it, and ultimately what I haven't shown here is how much that watershed extends out to draw upon the neighborhoods themselves. Our objective in this whole system is to provide a good and comprehensive service that will enable people to rely more upon public transit and use their cars less. In the end, this is a way that then our infrastructure, our matrix, is able to provide the circulation that people need in the city at a higher density of population. With the more people that take transit, it makes the roads work that much better. The basic presumption at this time is that with the LRT simply intersects with tributary bus lines, and we don't see any connection here as to what is the interface between the two. Simply, at this point in time, it's the presumption that the underground service will come up by elevator and by escalator and by stair to the surface, and that's it, and you'll connect up to your bus shelter. If we look, though, at what has been already done along the Danforth line, for instance, Bloor-Danforth line, we find that there is a station component, and again we see these on Yonge north of Bloor, and it's conventional to subways, that you actually have a ground station. And here, as we see so much throughout the tradition of building subways in the city, the bus routes have a connection in where they're able to then provide a sheltered space where the churn of the busy time of the day and the stairs and the elevators to below, the buses are able to find a place to stay and wait, just as a pedestrian user, the rider, is able to find a place to stay and wait. And again, if we can connect to that some transit-related retail, whether that be simply coffee shop type environments, there's always somebody there, there's always something open, always something warm, or again, it can be actually, in-transit services. So whether that's a convenience store, or whether that's a broad service offering, or whether it's anything particular in terms of doing dry cleaning or flowers or whatever, we just want to make sure that while one is in transit, one is able to access a whole bunch of services that otherwise one either wouldn't be able to get to, or they would have to take a car to get to. So the whole idea is that while you're riding in transit, you have access to all of this. This cross section here shows the platform box below ground, and the bottom of that is some 13.5 meters below the street level. Then we have the concourse level, which again is snuggled tight to the platform, and we still then from there have to get up to grade. So what we're showing here in the arrows is there's a need for 2 vertical transitions, one from the platform up to the concourse, and the concourse level we move horizontally to get out from under the street, and then we go up to street level from there. What we want to have when you get to ground level is a comprehensive station environment that completes that whole transition of movement from the LRT below to the street in the neighborhood, or from there onto buses. And in turn, in doing that development, the compensation is to provide the intensification we want to have as part of that development. So it is advantageous in game theory for each of these corners to compete to provide the service. Likewise, in the course of construction, in putting this platform down at the level it needs to be, there is a void portion of some 30,000 square feet that it's intended in the end at this time to actually fill back in and not utilize. Say there that there is great opportunities of how do we use this if we build this space as an open finished space rather than simply backfill it in. It could be either for parking, or it could be for retail or other purposes. This diagram shows us the base level of the trench in terms of putting in the station platform and the 2 rail lines, and up from this come the stairs and elevators to above. In this case, we have at the right-hand end the actual primary station. At the left-hand end, there's always the auxiliary, secondary, or safety-related access out the alternate route. The second diagram now brings us up a level, and the area in gray is the concourse level itself, and we're quite familiar with these. If you look, for instance, on the University line, St. Andrews Station, etc., you get an idea of a station, the functions that go on at that level, and obviously above and below as it goes off to get out from under the street. This goes off and is a tributary structure to get to the ground level itself. What is left over then at this concourse level is this large gray box area, which in this case I say that's 30,000 square feet that could be used as a retail offering, and that might be a possibility that then ties into development on each side of the street to become part of something which is a much larger complex. Ultimately, when we're dealing with in-urban situations, we're always dealing with small parcels of property, and every opportunity we have to actually aggregate and combine developments together, it allows us to move to a higher order or magnitude. The lower diagram I show here actually a parking comb to indicate how well that fits in, and one would be able to get in 2 levels of parking. Now obviously here the parking needs its ramps accesses coming from one of those properties on each side. So again, this is where the game theory comes in as to which development is able to take advantage of that space and put it to advantage. Now that parking can either be done as a public parking facility, and that might even allow taxis to come in. We could use part of that space even for bicycle lockers, etc., etc. Or it could be used in its entirety as parking for the adjacent development, or could be partitioned into sections of parking that's useful to development. So this can be a lever to encourage development on each side. This diagram here I've actually shown how the parking combs of development can be, for instance on the left, extended out to take advantage of the portion of the station cut, and this might, for instance, in being able to get 2 stories of parking, enable one to avoid the situation of having to go down one more level, or to provide a much more flexible approach to the design. And on the right I'm showing possibilities of actually where the parking could be knocked through onto both sides. In this case I've taken the upper left quadrants situation. The very bottom there with the dotted line shows you where the station component is under the street, and in the gray we see how the parking configuration works in its entirety, including the private property and the public property, and in the purple we see the concourse area. Another thing we can be looking at underground is how do we use this LRT route. Besides as a people mover, it can also be a freight user, and that means in our developments we could get rid of, for instance, the truck loading that normally goes with the development at grade. We're showing here at grade level at the very top being able to do the transition edge as housing related to the neighborhood, and then we start working into a higher intensity of development, including its car access and a residential address for tower above. And in the light and dark purple is that station component I've talked about already in terms of its churn space and as well as supportive retail structure. And then again here it shows in a sense the escalation of density, looking at doing say a tower in the corner at the intersections, terracing down to some degree, and then again that transitional edge. So we do reinforce an edge, and what we're able to do in terms of development, we're able to go to greater magnitude because on the other hand we do provide a very solid pronouncement of transition to the neighborhood. So all of this, quite frankly, this is the most important diagram. This is all that you have to remember about anything I've said, and that is these intersections between the LRT and the ground stations, the 25 of them, are zones or precincts that we need to take special care in their development. And what we're seeing is happening right now is that on the one hand we've laid out this extraordinarily expensive $8 billion worth of subway structure with an LRT train in it, and we have very little to show for it at ground level. This transition is not a buoyant part of the whole system. These gateways are not being addressed. In turn, what we're finding is that intensification, presuming a right to intensify because they are close to this new transit, are actually starting to move in towards these corners and to lock up the space and turn into a crystallized structure that will not accommodate a station. So we need to be able to turn around there and say, okay, the 4 corners of every one of these 25 intersections are opportunity zones for seeing the ultimate final interface gateway transition stations installed. Thank you.